Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
I remember the check-in desk being almost empty that night, which struck me as odd for an overnight flight from New York to Los Angeles. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the air smelled faintly of recycled coffee and sanitizer. I brushed it off as fatigue. I had been working a 16-hour shift, and my body was running purely on caffeine and stubbornness. The agent handed me my boarding pass with a forced smile, her eyes darting to the gate monitor as if expecting something. I didn't notice at the time, but later I would remember that moment, the way her hand trembled slightly as she slid the pass across the counter. I boarded the plane last. Most seats were already filled, and the hum of low conversation mixed with the occasional squeak of overhead compartments. The cabin felt off, not in a way I could put my finger on immediately, just a subtle sense of wrongness. I had a window seat in the middle of the plane, row 32. Across the aisle, an elderly couple chatted quietly, and in front of me, a young woman with bright red hair tapped her fingers nervously on the armrest. The flight attendants moved down the aisles, smiling too brightly, their eyes scanning the passengers in a way that felt intrusive. Then, as I buckled in, I noticed it. The plane seemed too quiet for a nearly full flight. Even the engine noises felt muted, almost distant. I tried to shrug it off, assuming fatigue was making me hyper-aware. Minutes passed. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the engines roared to life. The safety demonstration began, but the flight attendants' voices sounded hollow, echoing unnaturally down the cabin. I glanced around. Other passengers seemed oblivious, their eyes glued to screens or closed in sleep. As we ascended, I tried to distract myself with my phone, but there was no signal, typical for a plane. I slid it into airplane mode, but something about the screen's dim glow felt wrong. The red no service icon seemed darker than usual. Then came the first announcement. "This is your captain speaking," the voice crackled over the intercom. But it wasn't the usual calm, confident tone. This voice was slow, deliberate, almost rasping. "We are cruising at 30,000 feet. Please remain seated for the duration of your journey." I frowned. For the duration of my journey? The phrasing was odd, slightly ominous. I looked around. Passengers were staring straight ahead, faces pale and expressionless. The elderly couple hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The woman with red hair turned toward me and gave a tight smile, but her eyes were hollow, like deep, empty pits. I shook my head and laughed nervously. "It's just fatigue," I told myself. Then the lights dimmed, not the standard prepare for takeoff or landing dim, but almost a blackout. Just a faint strip of red light along the aisles remained. I could barely make out the contours of the seats, the aisle, the other passengers. The hum of the engines had shifted, lower, slower, almost like a heartbeat. I tried to stand, to go to the restroom, but my seatbelt wouldn't release. I tugged. Nothing. The metal click of the buckle refused to budge. Panic began to bubble in my chest. I looked around. Other passengers were still unmoving, frozen, like statues. Then I noticed it, the shadows. They weren't cast naturally by the dim cabin lights. They moved independently, stretching along the walls, twisting around the overhead compartments. I swear one of them had leaned closer to me, as if it were alive. I whispered, "Hello." My voice sounded absurdly loud, echoing in the cabin. Nothing. And then I felt it, a cold brush against my arm. Not like air, but something solid. Something wrong. I looked down. The seat next to me was empty, or it should have been, but a figure crouched there. Not human, at least not entirely. Its limbs were too long, its head too narrow, and its eyes dark voids that seemed to swallow the faint cabin light. I recoiled. My heart slammed against my ribcage. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to open my eyes in a hotel room, anywhere but here. But I was awake, horribly awake. The figure tilted its head and whispered, no, not whispered. It was more like a sound vibrating directly into my skull. You shouldn't have boarded. I tried to move again. My arms felt like they were weighed down by lead. The seatbelt was still locked. The figure's hand, impossibly thin and elongated, reached toward me. I could see my reflection in its black eyes. And it wasn't my reflection. My face was twisted in horror, but the mouth was wider, stretched unnaturally, as if screaming silently. I screamed aloud this time. The sound echoed in the cabin. Passengers didn't flinch. The flight attendants moved past me like I wasn't even there. Their smiles fixed, eyes dead. The plane lurched suddenly. Not turbulence. Something heavier. The overhead monitors flickered on. They were showing static, then faces. Hundreds of faces screaming silently, pressed against the screens. Their eyes were like mine had been, hollow, screaming, pleading. And then they all blinked at once, staring directly at me. I felt a pressure in my head, like my skull was tightening. My vision blurred. When it cleared, the figure was gone. But the shadows remained, crawling along the ceiling, along the walls, writhing like living smoke. Then the captain's voice came again, rasping and distorted. Everyone on board will reach their destination. A pause, a terrible, weighty pause. But not alive. The cabin light snapped off entirely. Complete darkness. I screamed again, but it was swallowed by the black. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me completely was the woman with red hair. She was smiling now. Slowly, impossibly, her mouth stretched inhumanly wide, teeth gleaming in the dim red emergency light. And then, silence. When the darkness swallowed the cabin, I felt weightless. Not like floating, but like gravity had abandoned me. My ears rang with a low rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Panic was a living thing inside me, clawing at my chest, demanding escape that didn't exist. Then, faint red lights flickered back on along the aisle. I could barely make out shapes. The other passengers were different. Some had their heads cocked to impossible angles, necks bending in ways that should have broken bone. Others were pressed against their seats, staring straight ahead with empty faces. The elderly couple from earlier had vanished, just gone. I tried again to release my seatbelt. The metal still wouldn't budge. I banged on the buckle, screamed, but it was useless. It was as if the plane itself were holding me down, keeping me trapped. The air smelled wrong, rotten, metallic, like blood mixed with something chemical, acrid. My stomach roiled, but I couldn't look away. From the corner of my eye, shadows shifted again. They slithered along the ceiling, curling around the luggage bins, stretching impossibly long and thin. I could feel them watching. Hungry? I realized with growing terror. I looked down the aisle. The flight attendants were walking past, but their movements were jerky, unnatural, like malfunctioning robots. Their smiles had grown wider, teeth too sharp, too white, and their eyes, no, their eyes weren't eyes anymore. Just black, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the cabin. One of them stopped in front of me. A hand, impossibly pale and slender, reached toward my face. I flinched, but my body didn't obey. The hand hovered, brushing my cheek lightly. Not gentle, it burned. Ice and fire at the same time. "You shouldn't be here," it said, not through its mouth, but directly inside my head. The voice was layered, multiple tones speaking at once, overlapping, screaming. I felt my mind twisting, stretching as though trying to escape through my ears. Then the plane shuddered, not turbulence, something heavier, deeper. The engines roared, but not the mechanical hum of a jet. It was organic, wet, like something massive moving inside the fuselage. A vibration ran through the floor, the seats, my bones. I dared to look out the window. I should have seen the black sky of night, the faint glow of city lights far below. But there was nothing. Absolute black. Not even stars. And in that black, I saw movement. Figures, massive and humanoid, shifting and crawling over the surface of the plane as if it were a living creature. Their eyes glowed faint red, and their mouths opened impossibly wide in silent screams. I screamed. The plane lurched violently. Something slammed against the fuselage, rattling the windows. Passengers around me moaned, some muttering words I couldn't understand, others screaming silently with mouths moving but no sound coming out. Then came the smell again. The air was thick with decay. I gagged, and that's when I noticed the blood. Thin streams along the aisle, black in the dim red light, crawling like liquid shadows. It moved toward me, slowly, purposefully. The woman with red hair was standing now, a few rows in front. Her head twisted unnaturally as she turned to look directly at me. The smile had disappeared, replaced by a void. And then she screamed, or rather, I heard the scream inside my own mind. I clutched my head, my ears rang, my teeth ached. But the sound continued, echoing endlessly, growing louder. Passengers began rising from their seats, not standing. They were floating, slowly, silently, some hovering inches above the floor. Others twisted in midair, limbs bending in impossible ways. They advanced toward me. The shadows seemed to follow them, stretching out to meet their bodies. I realized, horrified, that I wasn't the only one trapped. The plane itself was a trap. An entity, alive, hungry, and it had chosen this flight, chosen me. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice, distorted and broken. "Do you see now? The journey is not yours to survive." Then the lights went out completely, absolute darkness, and the whispers began. Hundreds of voices, all speaking at once inside my head, chanting, mocking, screaming. My vision went white with the effort to block them out. My body thrashed, but I was tied down, trapped in the seatbelt. And then I felt it. Something large pressed against the side of the plane, the fuselage bending inward under unimaginable weight. The structure creaked and groaned. I could feel it pushing the cabin, shifting the walls, crushing the metal around me. The passengers around me didn't scream. They smiled, floating now in the twisted darkness, their limbs stretched and broken, bodies bending in impossible ways. A flash of movement caught my eye. The red-haired woman was floating closer, her mouth stretched impossibly wide, lips splitting in two, revealing row after row of jagged teeth. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a plane anymore. It was a vessel, a predator, And the crew, all the passengers, they were feeding it, preparing me. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a wet, gurgling sound, like blood bubbling through a pipe. My lungs burned, my chest heaved, my mind screamed for escape, for consciousness, for anything. But there was nothing. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had descended, a faint light appeared at the front of the cabin. Emergency lights? No, they weren't mechanical. They glowed from nowhere, casting long, flickering shadows. In the center of the aisle, a figure emerged, tall, black, featureless save for eyes, red, glowing, unblinking. It moved slowly, deliberately, and the shadows around it recoiled as if in fear. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't alone. This thing wasn't part of the plane. It was outside, observing, judging, waiting. The red-haired woman froze, her twisted smile faltering. The other passengers paused mid-floating, heads turning in unison toward the light. And then, the figure spoke. Not into my ears, but through the very air, vibrating my bones, my teeth, my skull. Choose, or be consumed. And that's where it stopped. I sat frozen, the seatbelt locking me in place, the shadows around me pulsing like living ink. The voices receded slightly, leaving only the wet, metallic smell and the pounding of my own heart. The light at the front of the cabin grew brighter, almost impossibly so, and then silence. I don't remember how long it lasted. Hours? Minutes? Days? Time had no meaning anymore on Flight 237. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was in control now wasn't human. And whatever survived this flight would never be the same. Time had stopped. I don't know if it was seconds, minutes, or hours, but I could feel the unrelenting pressure of the plane against my chest, my arms, my legs. The seatbelt still held me tight, and the shadows continued to crawl along the walls, stretching, bending, reaching. I could feel them almost touching my skin, whispering words I didn't understand, thoughts I didn't want to comprehend. The red-haired woman had vanished, and the other passengers were either frozen or floating in midair, their faces locked in eternal, grotesque expressions of fear or ecstasy. I couldn't tell which. The air reeked of iron and rot. My throat burned, and my stomach churned violently. But the plane seemed to feed on my panic, grow stronger with it. Then the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice, but warped and layered, multiple tones overlapping. Welcome to your true journey. There is no landing. There is no escape. Only the void waits. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't external. It was inside my skull, gnawing at my thoughts, bending reality around me. My vision trembled, and for the first time, I felt something touch my mind. Not just the plane or the shadows. A presence watching me, judging me, feeding on my fear. The plane shuddered violently. The walls groaned. Overhead compartments rattled and burst open, spilling luggage that twisted and writhed in midair like snakes. They struck passengers, who did not scream but smiled, or maybe screamed silently within their own heads. My hands trembled on the seat armrests. I realized that I wasn't just terrified. I was becoming part of it. The plane, the shadows, the passengers, they were merging into a single consciousness, and my mind was being probed, analyzed, tasted. And then I heard a voice in my head, not my own, not human. "Do you wish to live?" I screamed, the sound raw and wet, echoing inside my own skull. "Yes," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "Please, just let me live." The voice didn't respond immediately. The shadows around me pulsed violently. I felt them pressing closer, almost tangible. The air became heavy, almost solid, like swimming through molasses. My lungs burned, but I couldn't move. I realized then that the plane wasn't just a vessel, it was alive, it was sentient, and it had chosen me as prey. The emergency lights flickered, revealing the faint outlines of the other passengers, or what had been passengers. Their bodies were no longer human, limbs bent at impossible angles, faces twisted, mouths opened impossibly wide. And all of them stared at me. Then the plane lurched again. Hard, not a bump. A full shift, as though it were diving into the earth itself. The cabin walls groaned, the floor buckled slightly, and a low, wet tearing sound echoed through the fuselage. Something slammed against my seat from the side. I twisted, but there was nothing there. The shadows had thickened, forming shapes, almost human, almost monstrous. One reached toward me, black tendrils curling around my legs, my arms trying to pull me out of the seat. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but the seatbelt held firm. And then I saw it. The figure that had appeared at the front before, the tall, black, featureless entity with glowing red eyes, was now moving down the aisle, slowly, deliberately. Shadows recoiled from it, and the floating, twisted passengers seemed almost fearful. It stopped directly in front of me. I could feel its gaze piercing me, turning my bones to ice, my blood to liquid fire. "You may survive," it whispered, not in words, but in thought, in vibration, in bone-deep resonance. "But you will not remain the same." The shadows around me writhed violently. One of them lunged, and for a split second, I felt myself pulled from the seat, my body stretching, bending, breaking. I screamed, and the entity's presence slammed into the shadow like a wall, scattering it. The floating passengers dropped suddenly to their seats, motionless, unmoving, but I could still feel their eyes on me. The plane shuddered again, harder. The fuselage groaned as if the metal itself were screaming. Then everything slowed. The shadows retracted slightly. The lights flickered back to a faint red glow. I was alone, or at least, mostly. The black figure hovered before me, its glowing red eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. And then it spoke again, this time slowly, deliberately. "The journey is complete. You may live, for now, but you carry it with you." Before I could respond, the lights flickered back to normal. The engines hummed steadily. The passengers around me were normal again. People asleep or watching movies, chatting quietly. The plane's rumble felt ordinary. I looked down at my hands. Nothing seemed wrong, but I knew. I had felt it inside me. The pull of the shadows, the whispering, the hunger. I had survived, yes, but a part of Flight 237 had entered me. A part of that dark, living entity, and it would never leave. The flight continued. The city lights of Los Angeles shimmered in the distance. The captain's voice came over the intercom, normal, calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for flying with us." I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Other passengers smiled, oblivious. Nobody else had seen what I had seen. Nobody else had felt it. I knew then, as the plane descended, that survival didn't mean escape. Flight 237 wasn't just a plane. It was a predator. And somewhere deep inside me, a part of it waited, patient, hungry, always whispering, I would never be the same. And the moment I stepped off the plane into the bright, ordinary world, I realized it had followed me.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.